You can be up to, where do you want to be? Yeah, you get up there, you can stand up there, you can stand down here.
Okay.
You don't need this thing at all, right?
Yep.
Okay. Sit, no, don't hit power. There we go. That's what I said.
Oh, we changed that.
Do you think that I'm that prepared?
Why not? That's right.
All right. There's no PowerPoint.
Okay, good.
There is nothing there. I am bare. There's no PowerPoint. I just like to talk, and I just like to share some things with you. Gerard was going to introduce me, and so I don't know if I need an introduction or not. Anyway, I'm Chip Scholes. I've been part of I've been part of the network for. I'm not on video, am I? I need to be on this side. I've been part of the network for 20 years. I can't believe I've been doing anything for 20 years, and so I may not be as long in the tooth as some people, but I've been around a little while. Tammy asked me to speak about attitude, and I think attitude is really interesting, especially since we're running a couple minutes late, and I'm the only thing that is standing between you and the bar. A free bar. So we're going to shorten up my comments a little bit so I get you out on time, and I think that's more important to get your whistle wetted than for me to talk. Attitudes are a really funny thing, though, aren't they? They're what makes our life. They're what makes our persona. They're what we do. And listen, the standard definition of an attitude is habits of thought. But see, I wasn't really satisfied with that, and so I wanted to go a little bit deeper. And what I've found about attitudes, and a lot of the things that I've read, is that attitudes are the stories we tell ourselves. They're the things we know for sure. And it's jarring when we all of a sudden know, or all of a sudden find out that some of the things we know for sure are not so. The stories that we tell ourselves are not true. And it's funny. My wife busts me all the time, and God bless her, she is a patient woman. But there are stories that are told about her family, her grandmother. Her grandmother died 4 months shy of her 100th birthday. And I always had the story that she died at home, and she was surrounded by kith and kin, and she was lying there. She hadn't eaten in a few days, and all of a sudden she raised up, and she pointed up, and went like this, and then fell back. I think it was a great story, isn't it? I told that story to my wife a little while ago, and she said, "That's not true." Okay, but it's a better story, isn't it? It's a better story. So, these are the stories we tell ourselves, and they get embellished a little while. One of my favorite stories, and if you knew me a long time, like several people in the room know me, I was rather large. I weighed 110 pounds more than I do now, and so I was getting on an airplane. And I had enough status that I just, if I didn't get bumped up, I generally got to pick where I wanted to sit. And on this particular day, I was coming back from Pittsburgh, and I tucked myself into 5A, which just was out of the way. And because I was pretty big, I was really concerned about, being that person that they play the inhuman Yahtzee game with. That inhuman Yahtzee game where they see somebody coming down the aisle and they go, oh God, please don't sit next to me. I mean, how inhuman is that, right? And so I tucked myself into 5A, and a guy sat down in 5C that was bigger than I was. So we had the beginning of the starting line of the Packers. And so now who are we looking to come and sit next to us? Right? We're looking for Tracy. You know, we're looking for somebody who weighs 100 pounds and doesn't take up much space. Because between the two of us, we got shoulders that are overlapping the seats, and other parts of our anatomy that were overlapping the seats. Who comes along? 6'4", 280, shorts, t-shirt, backpack that weighs 60 pounds, covered in tats. Where's my attitude? You know, I'm thinking, oh God, I can't believe it. And he comes and he swings the backpack down, and he sits down, and now we're all sitting like this. And I'm looking at his ink, and he's got this ink, and he's got this ink up his arm, and it says patience. And I thought it meant that he didn't want to kill somebody. You know, good reminder, right? Where's my attitude? My attitude sucks. I mean, it's Sunday morning. It's like 10 o'clock Sunday morning. It's hot, muggy, and I'm sitting with this guy, and he's playing music so loud that he's sharing his music with 3 rows. I didn't know iPods went that high. Stone Temple Pilots, I asked him. It was actually pretty good. And so here's this guy, and he, you know, I thought maybe he's a serial killer. And so the flight attendant, this was back in the day when you had to turn off your electronic ear, and she said that. Of course, he couldn't hear it, so I nudged him and said, hey, you know. And he didn't grunt. I was fully expecting, oh. He said, oh, excuse me. Wow. Okay, the attitude's getting better. So we're sitting there, and I finally, you know, I'm the kind of guy that's going to ask the questions. And I said, listen, I get your ink. It's pretty cool. He also had like piercings and all this other stuff. And I said, I got to ask you about patience. Are you trying to remind yourself not to kill anybody? This is where the attitude shifts. He looked at me, he kind of went, he said, that's the name of my 11-year-old daughter. Wow. I said, really? That's cool. I said, well, tell me about it. And he said, well, she's autistic and slightly retarded. And now I just read Jodi Picoult's novel, House Rules. And if you've ever read House Rules, first of all, I am safe in my sexuality, so I did read a Jodi Picoult novel. And I actually like her novels. But I'd read House Rules, which is about an autistic kid. And she does incredible background research. And so when she writes really well. And so I had something to talk to her, and you know, I said, well, is for an autistic kid, does she have a story that she focuses on? Because a lot of autistic kids have a story. And he said, yes, it's The Little Mermaid. And he rolled his wrist over, and there's The Little Mermaid. And I noticed that all his ink was kelp and sea creatures and everything that was for his kid. Attitude shift. The story that we tell ourselves, the story that we tell ourselves that this jerk is going to sit next to us, and all of a sudden he becomes human. Pretty cool, isn't it? You know, and I've done this for a long time, and I do this in my kickoffs all the time, but let's talk about the stories we tell ourselves. So raise your hands, and you probably do this too, but raise your hands if you're bad at remembering names. See, that's a couple different stories that we tell ourselves, isn't it? Because I just asked you if you're bad at remembering names. And you said, yes, I'm bad at remembering names. That's the story that you tell yourself. It's kind of like when you walk up and you say, hi, my name's Chip, what's yours? I don't care because I'm not going to remember it anyway. Isn't that what you're saying? And you do that over and over again, and it becomes the story you tell yourself. So when are you going to change that? When are you going to take it to the next level? When are you going to say, I am good at remembering names? I mean, if you call it an affirmation or whatever you want to call it. Unless the story changes, nothing else will. The story that you tell yourself. The other part of that is the way we feel about people. I know Fonz is going to hit with some of the arbiter stuff. I mean, do we see people as obstacles or we see people as people? But how do we see other people? And if we want to see people as humans, we have to find out about them. If you know the backstory, is it easier or harder to remember their names? Now, we're all coaches and consultants in the room. What do we do for a living? We ask questions, right? So how do you find out about the person that you're talking to? Ask questions. And go to the websites. I mean, there's a whole bunch of great opening questions. There's the 5 questions you should always ask. Where do you work? What do you do? All that kind of stuff. Where you live? What church do you go to? Tell me about your family. Doesn't matter what they are. But if you learn about people, if you're people-centric, that's a little bit more that you can learn and change your story and be better at remembering names. Now, I'm not going to say that you'll ever be great at remembering names. It's a point of personal pride for me. When I'm doing a facilitation, I do one-day leadership academies, and when I'm doing that, there are a bunch of people that I've never met before. I want to know everybody's name in the room before I leave the room. Point of personal pride and connection. Now, 2 chapters that I absolutely love, and Wendy knows this because she gets tired of fulfilling the orders, no, she doesn't. Is a product of the past and affirming yourself. And, if you think about it, the product of the past is all about the stories you tell yourself, right? And what brings that to mind is something that I talk about all the time. We've always heard that 95% of your basic attitudes are formed before the age of 5. Well, let's talk about how that happens. I mean, we come by those things very honestly. If we're talking about the way that our brain goes about putting things together, we're born with, depends on who you talk to, but between 58 and 86 billion neurons. There's differing opinions about how many neurons we're born with. And these neurons, whenever we have a piece of learning or an experience, they form synaptic connections. And there's a lot of new research that's come out about how synaptic connections form, and there are other kinds of connections. There are actually non-connected connections within the brain. That just came out last week. But what happens is, by the time you're 3 years old, you end up with about 15,000 synaptic connections. By the time you're 17, you only have 3,000. Where'd they go? I mean, hopefully at 17 you haven't killed too many brain cells. This group, I'm not sure of that. What happens is they fold in on each other. So when you're doing a values assessment, the values that come out in the assessment, if you take a look at the original Sprenger, the values that come out in the assessment are the reflection of the size of the neural networks, the synaptic connections that are brought forth in the assessment. You know, and it's one of those things that we just, the things we know for sure, we keep accessing, and that forms our political opinions. You know, because I can change your political opinion with a Facebook rant, right? I don't even get involved in those. I like reading them because I like reading how stupid people are, but on both sides of the aisle. Let me repeat that. On both sides of the aisle. But these synaptic connections fold in on each other and they become stronger. And so if you learn how to swim in a pool, you can learn how to swim at the beach, right? And if you learn how to swim at the beach, you can learn how to swim in a river. And if you learn how to swim in a river, you can learn how to swim in a pond. And you got to worry about mucky bottoms, but you know, it's similar. And that's how we grow things. So the thing is, as we get older and older, I know this happens to me, but as we get older and older, the things we know for sure really aren't those things, are they? Catherine Schultz wrote a great book, and no relation, but Catherine Schultz in 2010 wrote a book called Being Wrong. And she has a TED Talk that she did in 2012, and if you go on, it's Catherine with a K, SCHULZ, and I love the book. So my reading cadence is that I listen to a book. I walk about an hour a day, and so you know I do that 60 minutes. And I listen to a book, and if I really like the book, then I listen to it again. And if I really like the book, I'll buy the book and tear it apart and underline and that kind of thing. So many of the things we know for sure aren't. So many of the stories that we tell ourselves aren't really the stories, aren't really the things that we should base a life on. She tells the story that William Miller, who was a preacher in the middle 1800s in America, predicted that October 22nd, 1844, the world would come to an end. Very specific, October 22nd, 1844. So in the days before mass communication, thousands, in fact, hundreds of thousands, in fact, they even said that there may be a couple million of people around the world sold everything, showed up in churches, showed up in fields, and waited overnight for the end of the world to come. Kind of screwed up, didn't they? See, and so there were all these people that he convinced. There are all kinds of people who believed the story. And these were not just people that slopped the hogs. These were people who were bankers and lawyers and captains of industry that all bought into this in October 22nd, 1844. And he was wrong. He wasn't doing it for hucksterism. He wasn't doing it for anything other than the sincere belief that the world was going to end. And you know what he did after it didn't end? He doubled down. He said, I screwed up on the date. But I am fairly sure that in the next coming years, the world is going to end. 175 years ago. I think we have a pretty good track record. We haven't killed ourselves yet. See, and so when we're doing part of the past, I know somebody's doing that over the next couple of days in the sessions. But when we're doing part of the past, part of what I say is listen, what do we get wrong? What do you believe? Call them self-limiting beliefs, call them whatever you want, but what do you believe that ain't so? Because it isn't the things that we get wrong that'll hurt us, it's the things we believe that ain't so that'll get us. So that's product of the past. So then take a look at understanding and affirming yourself. So we talk about parent, adult, child. I don't even think that the term is used. So we talk about thought, felt, and taught self. If you dust off your Hartman, those correspond pretty clearly to the 3 dimensions of thought of Hartman. So Hartman, if you think about it, Hartman was a pretty cool guy. I would have loved to have gotten to know him. And the Hartman Institute is still at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. You can join the Hartman Institute. I think it's $100 or something like that, or $75 to join the Hartman Institute. I would encourage that because I love the way he thinks. So think about it. The parent is about big picture. It's about rules and order. It's about the authority figures that have talked to you all of your lives. What's systemic? The systemic dimension is all about rules. It's all about order. It's all about the things that are parental in your life. And then go to the opposite end. We've got child, which is about unbidden emotion, right? It's about I'm free. Matches up pretty well with intrinsic. Because intrinsic is about personal liberty, it's about doing what we want. And then the extrinsic matches up pretty well with the adult. Well, I tell you that because there's a couple points. One is, if we take a look at the original way the thing was written, they talked about externally how we deal with parent, adult, child. They talk about how if someone is getting parental, if someone says, you can't do that, what does it do? Hooks the child, right? If we invite somebody to talk in the adult, which is a coaching conversation, right? If we invite somebody to talk in the adult, what do? They answer us in the adult. So that's the important thing about parent, adult, child. But parent, adult, child has a little bit more to say. It has the internal side, which is we all have a parent in us. And we all have an adult, and we all have a child. And if you take a look at brain function, if you take a cross-section of the brain, it matches the brain pretty well. So the cortex, which is the outer portion of the brain, is where we do all of our heavy lifting. It's where we do all of our great thinking. It's where we understand vast amounts of complex information. It's the reason I can talk to you, because I have language, you have language to hear the message. Then we look at the limbic part of the brain, which is pretty much the middle of the brain. It has no language. It's where all the crap is stored. It's where all of our experiences lie. And then sitting at the brainstem is this little walnut-shaped organ called the amygdala. And the amygdala is where all of our emotions lie. The parent lies in the limbic brain. The adult lies in the cortex. The amygdala is where the child lies. Now, if you do a lot of stuff in emotional intelligence, and I spend a lot of time working with emotional intelligence, you know that the amygdala has a nasty habit of hijacking the cortex. That's the subject for a whole other talk. And we understand that because our cortex is a threat detection device. That's what our cortex is for. It's to detect threats. That's what it does all day. It scans the environment for threats, whether that be a saber-toothed tiger or whether that be somebody dissing you on Facebook. Did I?
So the cortex?
Yeah. The amygdala is emotion. It's only emotion. But our cortex scans the environment and takes in threats. So that's where we process that information. And what it does then is it feeds it towards the limbic brain, which then interprets the data that it's getting and then goes to the amygdala. The amygdala can shut down the cortex. And what I'm talking about is shutting down the cortex. You're walking across the street and you see a car. What do? You jump. The amygdala shut down your cortex. You don't sit there and go, hey, there's a car coming. Gee, I better move. That car's coming kind of fast. You jump. That's the amygdala hijacking the cortex. Okay? The reason I tell you that is to tell you this, that I love affirmations. The first couple of years in the network, I hated affirmations. I thought they were crap. And I was working with a gentleman that a lot of people know is Herdlinger. And I said, Herdlinger, you know, affirmations. And he said, no, wait. So he told me one part of this, and he said, you know, if you write down your affirmations and put it where you're going to see it for 30 days, I guarantee it'll change. So that's the way. That's the one way that you can put it on steroids. Here's another way. I want to share this with you because it is really powerful. And there was a lady, Robin Graham, that I learned this from many years ago. I kind of R&D'd her, you know, rip off and duplicate. And here's the thing. So listen, there's something you want to work on, right? What's that thing? You don't have to tell me, but write down that thing you want to work on. It might be more confidence. It might be changing your physical being. It might be better relationships with your kids. If they're under 13 to 15, no relationship with kids. But write down something you want to work on. Okay? Then I want you to think of a time that you achieved that. So let me back up. I want you to write an affirmation. And the way that I learned how to do affirmations a while back was, I'm a person who, I love it when. And really simple, I'm a person who is confident. I love it when we click. I'm a person who sells well. Whatever it is, but write an affirmation based on that thing that you want to improve. Okay? Now, I want you to think of a time when you achieved that state. May have been only once, but it's a time when you achieved that state. I'm sure there is some time where you felt physically great. I'm sure there was a time that you felt confident. I'm sure there's a time when you crushed that presentation. And then you want to develop in 3 different areas. You want to develop it visually, auditorily, and kinesthetically. What you see, what you hear, and what you feel. So in your mind's eye, and by the way, the really cool thing about our mind and the way we have the autonomic responses is that our mind doesn't really distinguish between what is happening now and a remembered past experience. So we can put ourselves emotionally in that past experience. So visually, what did you see at that time? What was the scene like? What was going on around you? Who were you with? Auditorily, what were the sounds that you heard? What were people saying to you? What were you saying to yourself? Now here's the kind of funky part, because I know you'll get it. I'm in a crowd that will get it. Listen, I work with a lot of architects and engineers, And trying this with architects and engineers is a struggle. But I know everybody's going to get this. So here's the kinesthetic part. I want you to connect with that feeling, that emotion, that time where you're really confident. And I want you to connect with that. And I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. Don't worry, the person next to you isn't going to do anything weird. And I want you to keep them closed until I ask you to open again. Connect with that emotion. If that emotion has a shape, excuse me, let me ask the first question. Where in your body do you feel it? You don't have to point. Where in your body do you feel it? If the emotion has a shape, what shape is it? If the emotion has a color, what color is it? If the emotion has a temperature, what temperature is it? If the emotion has a texture when you feel it, what texture is it? Go ahead and open your eyes. I don't know if you've ever been through an exercise like this before. If you've read, it's an old book, but Power versus Force by David Hawkins. He talks about muscle testing. This is partly muscle testing. If you do a lot in emotional intelligence, a big part of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. A big part of self-awareness is being able to identify the emotions and physically identify those emotions, to know what you're feeling at whatever time. But we all have physical manifestations of our feeling. And by the way, the feeling that we have doesn't start in our heart. It may feel it there, but it starts in our head. Hate to dissuade you of anything. But we have those feelings because the amygdala is hooked into a whole bunch of different glands. So, we talked about, you talked about dopamine before. If we feel afraid, if we feel anxious, that's a cortisol response. Cortisol is a nasty little chemical. If you are under a cortisol response for too long, it actually shrinks your brain. Dopamine is wonderful. It makes us feel good. We want those hits of dopamine. And I tell you all that to tell you something personal. In 2012, I had a stroke. I was standing in front of a class in Jacksonville, Florida, and there was a lady there whose husband had had 2 strokes. She sat there and watched me have the stroke and didn't say a damn thing. But over the course of a couple hours, I went from being able to talk and being able to move, and when all was said and done, I was paralyzed on my right side. I wasn't able to speak. Imagine that, a speaker that can't speak. Wow. And the reason I tell you all that is because it becomes attitudinal. One of the side effects of a stroke that most people don't know is it screws with your emotions horribly. I mean, if anything came on the TV with puppies, I was lost. But it also builds up a lot of cortisol, because when you get anxious a lot. And this is what I did. I borrowed an old an affirmation from Ray Overdorf. And I don't know if you remember the story about him being as large as he was, but he was going to die when he was 40, and his affirmation was, "I am health." So I swiped that because I'm not really original. I'm really good at ripping off and duplicating. And that became a mantra. And I had one moment that it was a woe is me moment. I had one moment that I said, why is this happening to me? But the rest of the time, it was all attitude. And now when my clients call, hi, how you doing? I'm great. I'm fantastic. I couldn't be better. And it was funny. I've done it for so long, and my clients expected the way I do it, that when I just recently, my hand was pissing me off, and a lot of things were pissing me off, and I answered the phone and I said, I'm not very goddamn good. And he said, whoa, what the hell happened to you? You know, so that's the challenge. Is look, I know we're a really great group of positive people. Tammy talked about smiling, but how do you answer when somebody says, "How are you doing?" You say, "I'm fine," or do you say, "I'm great, I'm fantastic"? And if you call your clients on it, because when you talk to your clients and you say, "How are you?" and they say, "Oh, I'm okay," bust them out. Because they're not going to change the way they feel until they change their story. Thanks, appreciate it.